Thank you very much for that. I'll just say hello, I'm Hilary. I'm going to hand over to Eleanor. I've got control of the slides, so I do hope I work them properly. But yeah, I'll hand over to Eleanor.
Thank you, Hill. Hi everyone, I'm Eleanor Coyne. So today we'll be giving an overview of the plastic packaging tax and also hosting a Q&A. Could I have the next slide, please, Hill? So what we put together today is designed to give a general overview of the tax, explain our compliance activity, talk through detailed legislation and guidance available, and help you to further understand the requirements. We are intending to cover quite a lot today, so we may not get time to go into too much detail on certain aspects. If there's anything you would like more information on, I'd first recommend reading guidance on gov.uk and viewing our recorded previous webinars. Links for these are available at the end of the slide deck, and we're happy to share these with you afterwards. So it'll be myself talking through the first topics, including scope of the tax, and then Hill is covering who is liable for the tax, including last substantial modification, taxpayer responsibilities, payments and evidencing. Could we move on to slide 3, please? Thank you. So to recap on some basic points on the tax, as a part of tackling the pressing global issue of plastic pollution, the government is committed to introducing the plastic packaging tax. The tax will encourage the use of recycled plastic instead of new material within plastic packaging. This will create greater demand for recycled plastic and in turn stimulate increased levels of recycling and collection of plastic waste, diverting it away from landfill or incineration. It's charged at £200 a tonne and paid by manufacturers and importers of plastic packaging that contains less than 30% recycled plastic. To prevent disproportionate impacts on the smallest businesses, producers and importers of less than 10 tonnes of plastic packaging within a 12-month period are not required to register. The government estimates the tax will lead to around 40% more recycled plastic being used in 2022-23. Since the tax was announced, we have seen increased investment in the UK's recycling capacity. Could I have the next slide, please?
Eleanor, I'm already on slide 4. I'm actually being shown
Yeah,
slide 4
that's.
now.
I've got slide 4.
Oh, it is
Have
slide
you not
4.
got slide 4?
What is in scope of the tax?
I think, yeah, that's, oh, sorry, everyone. Oh, I don't know where it's, okay, we'll stay at that slide.
Is that what you can see?
I think, yeah, I think it should be, yeah, that's the right side for this bit, sorry. Okay, so the tax applies to plastic packaging components. This is a product that is designed to be suitable whether used alone or in combination with other products for a packaging function. That is to contain, protect, handle, deliver or present goods at any stage in the supply chain from the packaging manufacturer to the user or consumer. This definition includes plastic packaging used in the home where it has an equivalent in the supply chain, for example, cling film and plastic tape. This is in keeping with the tax environmental rationale. We have published secondary legislation that clarifies the scope, includes products designed to provide a single-use packaging function for the containment of a commodity or waste by a user or consumer. Examples here are nappy sacks and disposable plastic cups. Packaging made of more than one material will be considered plastic if plastic is the predominant material by weight. Plastic packaging components made from bioplastic and bio-alternatives are also in scope. Individual packaging components are taxed separately. Could I have the next slide, please? This should be number 5. Yeah, okay. So here we have some example items. A plastic bag. This is an example of a product designed to provide a single-use packaging function for the containment of a commodity or waste by a user or consumer, so in scope of the tax. Here is also an example of a Tropicana Tetra Pak. This is a good example of a multi-material packaging. but we need to consider the components separately. So the carton element probably isn't in scope as the packaging isn't predominant by weight, but the plastic lid would be. On the bottle, this would be in scope. The lid, label and bottle would be taxed separately and 30% threshold would be applied to each. To have the next slide, please. For what isn't taxed, I've split this into two groups. The top group is completely outside the scope of tax. By this, I mean it isn't taxed and you don't report it on a return. First here is transport packaging used to import goods. For example, pallets and pallet wrap used to group products together and secure consignments of products to pallets during the delivery of goods into the UK. We have had numerous questions on this exemption. If you're looking to determine if plastic packaging is considered transport packaging, look at the definition given in guidance and the tax's primary legislation. The definition in legislation is the same as that used to define tertiary packaging in the Producer Responsibility Scheme. To clarify, transport packaging imported as a good itself is in scope of a tax, as is transport packaging manufactured in the UK. Other plastic packaging out of scope is packaging manufactured or imported for non-commercial purposes, packaging which is integral to the product, items where packaging is secondary to a storage function, products primarily designed to be reused for the presentation of goods, and packaging used in aircraft, ships or railway stores for international journeys or as road, ship, rail and air containers. I'll cover C to E in more detail in a moment, but first to turn to the bottom group on the screen. These are reported on a return, but no tax paid where you have evidence to support your claim. This bottom group also counts towards the 10 tonnes registration threshold, whereas the top group does not. Any packaging components you put aside for a non-packaging use also counts towards the 10-tonne threshold, but does not need to be reported. So I have the next slide, please. I said I will cover in more detail the three categories that clarify plastic packaging components which are out of scope. These are set out in the secondary legislation, and the first category is packaging components that are designed so that the packaging component is an integral part of the goods sold to a user or consumer, necessary to enable the goods to be used by the user or consumer, and discarded by the user or consumer once the goods inside are consumed or with the goods. We've got some examples that meet this definition on the slide, such as a tea bag, a printer cartridge, and a lighter. Some examples of things which we wouldn't classify as integral are a soap dispenser and a single-use ready meal tray. Have the next slide, please. So the next category of products that aren't considered plastic packaging components are products where the packaging function is secondary to the storage function. These are packaging components that are designed to be suitable to contain goods at the point of sale to the consumer or user. They contain, support or preserve the goods throughout their lifetime. The tax does not apply to products that meet this definition. Again, we've got some examples that meet this definition on the slide, such as a toolbox, glasses case, first aid box and CD cases. To mention reusable storage boxes, such as underbed storage, are not in scope of a tax, nor are items like lunch boxes and reusable bottles and coffee cups. So have the next slide, please. So the last category is where something isn't considered plastic packaging. Last category where something isn't considered plastic packaging is where it's primarily for the reuse of the presentation of goods to a user or consumer. So they have been permanently set aside for this purpose before or as soon as they have been manufactured or imported. A record of this setting aside must be kept. Some examples we have on the slides are display shelves and shop fittings specifically for presenting goods. I'm now going to hand over to Hill, who's going to go through the next few slides.
Thanks very much, Alan. I hope everybody's caught up with all of that. So turning to when the tax is charged and who should account for it. Well, if some of you have read the guidance already, perhaps you'll know that it's the business who is importing or manufacturing a finished packaging component, basically, who is potentially responsible to register and account for the tax. We use the term finished, so how we define that is if it's undergone its last substantial modification, which I'll go into a bit further detail on in a minute. Where the last substantial modification happens during pack filling, we treat the last substantial modification as the final sort of process before that. So an example of that is, so we don't capture pack fillers of, say, salad and stuff like that. So if they're forming bags and filling them at the same time, we didn't really want the tax to sort of be so far down the supply chain because there's less knowledge about the recycled content of the packaging and all that sort of stuff. So we would try to sort of make the point that the tax point is as higher up the chain, if you like, as possible. But we'll show you some examples of that. And I'm not sure how relevant it is for your industries, but hopefully it will provide you with some information anyway. So there is a threshold. Eleanor just talked about the sorts of things you need to count that count towards that threshold. It's a 10-ton threshold. If you think you're going to exceed that in the next 30 days, you need to register now. If you exceed it sometime within the course of this year and you go over that 10-ton threshold and you look back to April, then you can register then. So it depends on the size and the volumes of manufacturing or importing that you're doing. Companies under the same control can register as a group, so there's group functionality on our online service. In terms of accounting for the tax, they're every quarter, they're standard quarters, so April, May to June, and then we've got July to September and so on. And all returns are then due on the last working day of the following month. So for September, I think it's the end of 31st of October, which I think is a working day. So Eleanor talked about, human medicines and packaging that contains more than 30% recycled content. So for all of these things, if you're going to be reporting that on your return, you do need to have the evidence to hand. We won't be asking you to submit that to us, but should there be any sort of compliance intervention or follow-up from the return at any point, you should have that evidence available, including exportations. You may be aware that we had a requirement that there was going to be something on invoices, so a statement saying, plastic packaging has been paid and how much and which components. We had a lot of pushback from industry on that because of the sort of IT, implications and so on, and the cost and the burden. So it is something we are looking at, and we're working with our industry working group, which has a number of trade body reps in it, as to how we might take that forward, basically to make it simpler and less burdensome for businesses. So if I just move on, I just talked then about the threshold. So yes, the forward look, really, not everybody would meet this forward look test. So if today you had an order for, 20 tons of plastic wrap to be delivered in the next 3 weeks, you would then meet that forward look test. So you'd have to register from today. You've got so many days, you've got 30 days to do that, but your registration start date would be today. Like I said, some businesses never meet that test, and they would just rely on the backward look test. So you'd look back the last 12 months or for this year, just for the 1st of April 22. And once you've hit that 10 tons, you then register from the first day of the following month. So you don't have to account for what's gone before, you just register from the first day of the next month. Those tests are quite confusing to some people, including our own staff, but it is what they use in VAT, so it's not something unique to plastic. So evidence, we talked about, what you need to sort of support what you're declaring on a return. Obviously, for things like plastic that contains over 30% recycled content, depending on where you've got that from, you may have reprocessed it yourself, you may have got it from somebody else. So some sort of evidence of how the plastic makeup of that item. So that could be product specs, contracts, and so on. And also, we sort of say there's a lot of due diligence around this. We're not prescriptive about you must have A, B, C, and D. But you need to be satisfied that your content, that it's got recycled content in it and the appropriate levels. Obviously, only 30% and above we particularly care about. But we sort of rely on you to do that due diligence and trust, the people in your supply chain to make claims that the plastic has more than 30%. So we do get quite a lot of queries about it, and hopefully, when we've sort of tax is bedded in a little bit, hopefully we'll perhaps be able to provide a little more certainty around that sort of evidence in the future. Substantial modification I mentioned before. So this means where there's been a significant change in the nature. So that could be its shape, maybe making it into a bag. It could be structure, some other sort of process, thickness, perhaps adding more plastic to it, or the weight. When we talk about weight, potentially printing. So if you think about some biscuit wrappers have loads of ink on them, and it does actually add to the weight. And sometimes has to be taken into account. But where we say printing just a use by date or a sell by date or something, wouldn't necessarily consider that a last substantial modification. And we don't define weight in legislation. We just say if it increases the weight. So again, it's something for you and your suppliers and so on to just be aware of. If I just go on to the next one here. Some exceptions are blowing and from a preform, so you'll be aware you've sort of got bottles in a preform shape. So they're a bottle as a preform, they're a bottle when they're blown. So we consider the last substantial modification that is at preform stage. And so that is the finished packaging component, essentially. Again, exceptions are things like cutting and labelling. So cutting a roll of film, a big roll of film into a small roll of film, it's still the same film. So we treat the packaging component as being finished when it's, a roll of film and not when somebody cuts it. If you do extrude a roll of film and then you cut it at the same time, that can be counted as a last substantial modification. So I don't want to overcomplicate it, but it does mean that you've got that bit of leeway. But we wouldn't suggest that you extrude a roll of film in April and then you don't cut it until September. We would consider April as the point because it's not really being done at the same time. Just some examples of that. So we just talked then about extruding the preform, blowing a bottle, business B blows the bottle and somebody else fills the bottle. So we talked just then about the preform is that point. So this denotes the tax point here, i.e. when it's finished. So if it was finished in June, you would be accounting for that on your Q1 tax return and so on. Here, the same business is extruding the preform and blowing the bottle. So the item is finished at this point here where they're blowing the bottle. And then here, we've got extruding the preform. We've got another business blowing it and filling it. And if you remember back to when I talked about pack fillers, same goes here. While they're blowing it and filling it, it's not counted as substantial modification. So the tax point is always really at the highest point up the chain, like I said, where manufacturers tend to know more about the content of recycled content of any items. And then, so that was a bottle example. Here is a film example. So business A is extruding it and cutting it and putting it onto large rolls. So we say that this product is finished at this point here. Somebody else is cutting it and somebody else is wrapping it. So those aren't considered substantial. Similar example here where they import other film. I think this example is designed to show that it's being imported into the country. The point of import would be where it is finished. When we say import, it's actually after it's cleared customs, and so it's in arrears. So unlike other customs duties and import duties, it's not paid over to customs at the point of import. It is something that you just account for in the relevant period that it cleared customs. And we do get quite a few queries about, can I use the date that it reaches my warehouse when it's been imported? And that's a no. It needs to be the date and the month in which it was actually clearing customs, not necessarily when it arrived at your business premises. Here we've got somebody who's extruding film, somebody who's printing on it, and we mentioned that printing could definitely add weight to a product. And then somebody is cutting it and forming it into bags. Now, these two people here, the people extruding and the people printing, really need to speak to each other so that the manufacturer of the original product, if you like, knows what's happening further down the supply chain, so that they don't account for tax because they know that you're going to print on it. And then similarly here, somebody's forming it into bags, but they're not filling those bags at the same time, but they're changing the shape. So the tax point is actually that forming into bags period. So it's obviously key that businesses do talk to each other about what's happening to that packaging along the supply chain, so that A, it's not getting taxed twice, and B, the right person is accounting for it, for any tax on it. The second one is similar, but here the project is finished because it's been printed on here. So that is the last substantial modification, because the other people are cutting it and somebody else is forming it into bags during pack filling, which we said before doesn't count, so to speak. And then again, a similar example here, something's imported like a film. They don't need to, if it's not finished, because they know they're going to print on it, the printing bit is where the product is finished. So that is where the tax point lies. I hope those sort of make sense. It's not the easiest thing to put into guidance, but those hopefully will sort of illustrate what happens perhaps in supply chains. May not be entirely relevant to your manufacturing businesses, but hopefully some truths in there. Okay, I will move on. So recycled plastic. So this is either from pre-consumer waste or post-consumer waste. So that's stuff that collected at the curbside and stuff like that, which counts. So sometimes in a business where you have waste created during your processes, if it's taken away and reprocessed and put back into a different process, that's fine. If it's simply scrap and regrind and put into the same production process, it's not really recycled plastic. So we've put some guidance out there about that. Obviously, businesses, if we were to allow that, then a lot of waste could be created and sort of potentially treated as recycled plastic when it isn't really. I think in our original legislation, any waste, pre-consumer waste, had to be reprocessed elsewhere and sent back to you. That isn't the case now. If you have your own reprocessing facilities on site in a different room or whatever, that's fine. I think Eleanor touched on some of the things you need to report, but you're not going to be having to account for tax. So there are things like exports. So if you know when you manufacture something, you're going to be exporting it, you can account for that accordingly, and it's essentially deferring the tax. You've got 12 months from the date of you manufacture to export that stuff. So you're not going to pay any tax on that. If it happened that you never did export it, then you would have to account for the tax. And tax credits, this can happen where, say, you manufacture something, you sell it to your customer then exports it, and he tells you that he's exported it and gives you the evidence. You can claim the tax back from us. They can't, but you can. And then if he had charged it onto them, then you can refund them. So it isn't a legal requirement for anyone to do this. So if they don't tell you it's been exported, well, it just remains the same. And of course, you're not legally obliged to charge on the cost to your customer anyway. Many businesses are doing, but some aren't. The other time a tax credit could occur is when we talked before about last substantial modification. If, say, you manufactured something, sold it to your customer, and then your customer said after the event, oh, by the way, I'm printing on this, or oh, by the way, I'm shaping it, I'm changing the shape, I'm making it into something else, then they become the sort of responsible party for accounting for the tax, because the product wasn't really finished when you manufactured it, but they didn't tell you that. So again, evidence from them of what they've done with that packaging, you could claim the tax back that you've paid and pass it back to them and so on. But with the sort of assurance that they are accounting for the tax themselves. Okay, if we just move on. I think that's essentially it, actually. We've got in the next few slides links to guidance that Eleanor mentioned, even Welsh ones as well. And then there's some links to the secondary legislation, and there's links here to the webinar and so on. So, Eleanor, is there anything I've missed before we?
No, I think that's everything.
Okay. Well, I know that was a lot to cover, and if you've not, read too much guidance or know too much about it, hopefully it did, help with your understanding. But of course, we can stay on a little bit longer anyway to answer any questions. What I might do is shut the slides down, if that's okay, Annette and Martin.
Definitely.
And then I'll get my mouse back and know what I'm doing.
Really informative, both of you. I found it really informative. So we'll throw it open to everybody who's here now, I guess. And sorry to sort of bombard both of you, but I think if anybody's got any questions, would you like to ask them now? Nobody. Everybody's gone quiet. Don't be scared.
I was going to say, you put stuff in the chat if.
Quick question from me then. In relation to I suppose a majority of our members or a lot of proportion of members are going to be packer fillers. Right in saying that in terms of plastic packaging tax, they don't have any legal obligations. Would that be correct?
No, if they're forming bags and pack filling at the same time, then no, they wouldn't.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think we made that distinction just so that we didn't have, thousands of pack fillers having to register and stuff like that.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes. I think one of the other things that members are having a somewhat of a difficulty with is the sort of definition of sort of transport packaging or transit packaging or whatever it is, and trying to kind of dig down into the definitions and what is and what isn't. I think is I think proving troublesome.
I think what I'd say on that is we quite acknowledge that we get quite a few queries around that, and we are actually looking at it, the issue, and hoping to make guidance a little bit clearer for businesses, certainly in the next month or two.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Anybody else? Chris, I saw you nodding away there when Peter sort of asked about sort of transient packaging. Is it something?
Yeah, that was the exact question I was going to ask. Yeah. It may be very relevant to us. Yeah.
And of course, there are changes coming for 2023 onwards, which you should be aware of. Any sort of real in-depth changes, Hilary or Eleanor, when it comes to sort of going forward into 2023 and beyond?
No, nothing planned. We have a new government, a new PM and all of that, so you never know, do you?
No, exactly.
But no, I think one thing I'd say, so yeah, we're definitely be looking at transport packaging. We recognise it is a bit of a difficult area for some businesses. And I think the other thing I'd say on weight of packaging, if you need to fill out a return, you can round down the kilograms that you have to record, but that's for the total weight. We wouldn't say for each production line or for each component you round it down. When you've added it all together, then you can round it down. So that was just an additional thought there. And I think the other thing we get a lot of in our inbox, which I presume, see our inbox is on the end of the slide deck, is queries about when we talked about last substantial modification. Obviously, it's very important because it's either you or them, you know what I mean? So businesses sort of argue a little bit sometimes about who's actually finishing the product. It's obviously something that HMRC are aware of, and compliance and so on. But yeah, it's just one of those tricky areas sometimes.
I was just going to ask that about the supply chain and how, because I imagine that's going to be fairly tricky for some members. The visibility of it, and then knowing what supplier has already logged, registered, and what hasn't, and then of course the accountability for it. Is there some clear guidance on that, some support on that, how manufacturers can identify those?
I suppose it's just what we went back to saying earlier about keeping lines of communication open and knowing really what's happening to either what you're manufacturing or importing and what's happening to it. And then there's the element of due diligence in businesses for all sorts of areas, not just plastic packaging tax, but being sure that if you're not accounting for the tax, is somebody else, and making sure that you can demonstrate, and we have got guidance around this, you can demonstrate that you've done that due diligence, and that you're as far as you can. Do you know what I mean? So we wouldn't say you've got to go and look at somebody's return that they've filled in or anything like that. It's not that bad, it's not that extreme, but it's just doing that normal business sort of relationship diligence type activity, I think.
It's a good record keeping, I suppose. If anybody does come back and ask the questions, you can evidence that you've done all you could. Yeah.
I think from what you're saying, both of you, it's much easier to sort of ask the question before you make that return, rather than make the return and then suddenly have to backpedal, as it were, or backpedal and sort of go, oh, I think we've got it wrong because of. It's much better to ask that question up front.
I think one of the other ones that I've come across is this kind of definition of sort of integral part of the goods, particularly in relation to imports. The example I would give is you've got let's say you've got a company who buys in wire, for instance, and that wire is on a plastic reel. That reel then goes directly onto a machine. The wire is used and then the reel is discarded. So essentially, the question is, is that integral part of the goods? It's not. I wouldn't imagine it's sort of transport packaging, but the wire can't be used essentially without it being on that reel, because that reel is attached directly to the machine and unwound on that machine. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I think generally reels are in scope, aren't they, Eleanor? As far as I can recall, we've had previous ones of agricultural, I don't know, netting or something like that on a wheel, sort of similar thing. And yes, it's convenient. Yes, it's whatever, but you can use the wire. Do you know what I mean? You can use the wire as wire. The fact that it's on a reel.
You can't use it on that process.
Mm-hmm.
Because the reel has been designed to be fitted directly to the machine that the wire is used on. So it's not the wire isn't kind of unwound and kind of cut manually. It's actually physically attached to the machine, and the reel has been designed so that it can be attached directly to the machine.
Okay, well that may be an exception. I think we'd have to have a look at it though, Peter.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Anybody else? You've got a chance to ask the regulator. You don't get this chance very often. It normally comes via ourselves, and you've got these two willing participants here. Are there any more questions? Okay.
Or even any particular challenges you're really worried about?
No. Okay.
And
I'll come to you later, Martin and Peter.
Yeah, actually, I'll come through myself or whatever. Ladies, Eleanor, Hilary, thank you so much for being here today and presenting what you've presented. In my mind, and the questions I get asked, it's cleared up a couple of things for me. So that's really, really good. Thank you for allowing us to record this, so we've got sort of some of the answers there for us and have been provided by yourselves. And I'm sure if any of our members, either here on the call or not having been able to join the call, have got any questions, then they'll come through us. And are we okay, Eleanor, to direct those questions to yourself, and then we'll sort of discuss those and do it that way?
Yeah, that's fine. I think when we share the slides, our mailbox details should be on the last slide. I think they are. So if you just send any queries you have to the indirecttaxdesign.team@hmrc.gov.uk, it's on the slides. best way to reach us.
Fantastic. Eleanor, thank you. Hilary,
Martin,
thank you. Nice
sorry
to
to-
meet you both.
Sorry to interrupt. Eleanor, you were going to mention a survey, I believe.
Yes, so we've got a really quick Microsoft Forms survey that we'd really like all of you to complete. It takes less than 5 minutes. It's just because we really value your views on the communication and guidance for the tax. Your feedback will help us improve the quality and relevance of information we provide in future. So I'll send the link into the chat now. And also, if Annette and Martin, if the link could be shared with slides after in an email as well, that would be really helpful.
Yes.
But if we say maybe a week to get back to us with your responses, but I suppose we just as soon as possible, it takes less than 5 minutes. It would be really helpful. I've posted it in the chat, so hopefully that's worked. But yeah,
Great.
thank you.
Superb. Really good session this morning, both. Thank you so much for doing this for us. And we finally got there, and really looking forward to sort of now moving forward on this, and hopefully our members have gained something out of this, and we will sort of hopefully see you again at some stage for something else. Not necessarily plastic packaging tax, but who knows what's down the line. So everybody who was here this morning, thank you for attending. Our 2 speakers, thank you for your time. And if you've got any questions, then please direct them at either Annette or myself, and we'll take those on board. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for the invite. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Have a
everyone.
nice weekend.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.